Hi friends, it's Lisa Hetrick, illustrator for Gina K Designs, and I'm so grateful you could join me today. I have a fun, quick and easy watercolor card I'm going to share with you today. So let's just dive in and talk about the supplies that I'm going to be using today. I have my favorite watercolor paper for paper crafting. It's from B Paper Company. All of the supplies will be listed down below as well. I'm using some Gina K Designs heavyweight white cardstock. Love this heavyweight cardstock for my cards. So I have two pieces of watercolor paper here. One is going to be for my layer, and then the other piece is going to be for my die cut piece. My piece of watercolor paper for the base is cut to 4 by 5 1/4. And then I have my extra piece of watercolor paper here because I'm going to be using the double stitch die from Gina K Designs to cut another layer. And inside of that layer, I'm going to cut another die cut piece to create a really fun window. So here's my A2 sized card in the Gina K Designs heavyweight cardstock, and it's just scored at the 4 1/4. Love this cardstock, and it holds the watercolor paper really nicely. I have some Gina K Designs amalgam ink, and I'm also using picked raspberries and twisted citron for distress ink for the watercolor techniques that we're going to do today. And I've got some other supplies here, my Tidy Towel, my Gina K Designs Connect Glue. I have some water. I have a paintbrush here. You can use any kind of round paintbrush or any paintbrush that you have on hand. You don't need to use this one. I've got my scissors for a little bit of fussy cutting, and I have some purple tape and some foam tape here from Gina K Designs as well. I have some purple tape to hold my die cuts down. I also have this cute little gem picker and some of these sequins that I think I'm going to use at the end of the card. Not sure yet. And I'm also going to be using this heart to create a fun window. Okay, so let's get started with the basic wet in wet watercolor techniques. So I'm going to be creating a background first with my background layer. So I've got my piece of B Paper Company watercolor paper, and I'm getting it super, super saturated. I'm going to take my two distress inks and just mash them down onto my mat here. And then I'm going to use them for my watercolor medium. I'm not going to mix the two together, but what I'm going to show you is how we can get a wet and wet watercolor blend from top to bottom and bottom to top by mixing these two colors together. So starting from the top, I'm just painting in some of the picked raspberry color and letting the water that is on the paper just kind of help it flow down. And you can see that I'm getting a graduated version of this color. So it's darker at the top and then it gets lighter towards the middle. So I'm cleaning up my brush here because I don't want to contaminate the twisted citron with the picked raspberry as I started to kind of do that. What's happening here is we get this graduated wash. So we get that color coming from top to the middle, the picked raspberry from the top to the middle, and the twisted citron from the bottom to the middle. And where the two meet, we get another color, another version of a color. So I'm going back from the top to the middle with the picked raspberry just to kind of create that graduated look and feel of the color. And I'm going to apply a little bit more of the twisted citron here. I'm just getting my brush nice and juicy and just going from the bottom and just painting back and forth all the way up to the middle to get that graduated look of color. So this watercolor technique is a wet and wet technique. It means that the paper is wet, the brush is wet, and the ink is wet. So everything is wet and moving across the paper. This technique is a super simple way to create a watercolor background that's kind of washy-washy. We've got two colors mixing together, especially if you're just getting started with watercolor techniques. This is a great way to dive in to just kind of get a feel for how the inks move like watercolor. Okay, so I'm just drying up the top and the back of this piece, just getting it bone dry, and you can see how rich the color is from top to bottom and bottom to middle, and we've got that nice graduated wash of color. I'm digging it, love it, and it's just these two colors work so well together, and I encourage you to experiment with any kind of inks that you have in your stash to see what colors you can mix up. Okay, so now it's time to move on to the die cut piece that's going to go on top of the layer here. So I'm going to do a double die cut here. I've got the large rectangle from the double stitch die, and then I'm going to take the heart from the double stitch circle die and put it on the inside of the rectangle to try to create this little window here, little die cut window. Super fun. And I think it's just going to look really, really good over that watercolor background. So I've got my Spellbinders Platinum here, and I'm just going to go ahead and run that through really quick and get my die cuts so that I can move on to the stamping. So here is the die cut piece, and I love it. So the really cool thing about this is you get that extra heart embellishment. And yes, it's perfect. Just layering it over top, you can see that graduated wash right there in the middle, that lighter versions of the two colors. And we've got the darker versions on the top and the bottom. So we're getting a lot of variety of color here without adding a lot of weight to the card. So I'm digging it, love it. Okay, so now it's time to move on to the stamping. And I'm going to use this big corner floral from my Just a Little stamp set with Gina K. I want to get a big botanical bang in one stamp. This stamp is really big and can cover a good portion of the card. So, and it has so many elements in it that we have a lot to play with. So since that corner stamp is kind of large, I really want to get a nice impression of the stamp onto the watercolor paper. Now, if I wasn't using watercolor paper, I probably wouldn't pull out my MISTI. So I'm going to go ahead and put my base layer down. And I'm also going to position my die cut layer over top. So I'm just kind of eyeballing all of this. I'm going to add a little bit of purple tape to the back of this die cut so that I can lay it right on top of the watercolor layer. Now this is two pieces of watercolor that I want to get a really nice impression on. I'm going to stamp over top of both pieces simultaneously. So I'm going to need a little bit of purple tape to just kind of hold this down really, really well. And I'm leaving a little bit of room at the bottom for my sentiment, the paper hug sentiment, which I love, love, love. So before I position my stamp and actually do the stamping, I'm going to take a little bit of purple tape and put it on the back of the heart die cut that came out of the center. And I'm just going to put that die cut back in because I want to preserve the watercolor that's in the base layer because I want that to show through in the end when I put the card together. So I'm taking the whole corner botanical and I'm just kind of noodling it around and positioning it where I'd like to draw some attention to the sentiment down at the bottom that's going to go underneath. So I'm using that a paper hug inside sentiment. Love, love, love this sentiment. It's just so cute and fun. And this wintry set, it's just perfect for that. So, and it's just so versatile to use for anything that you plan on sending a card for. A paper hug is just so cute. Love it. Okay. So now I'm just inking up the corner element and I'm getting it nice and juicy. And I have the black, the jet black amalgam ink, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp that down 2 to 3 times. Whenever you're working with watercolor paper, that watercolor paper really just wants to suck up that ink no matter what it is. So if you're using an ink that like an amalgam that is meant for coloring, you're really going to have to stamp that down 2 to 3 times. So I'm going in here, this is my third time, to get just a really nice impression. And I'm not pushing super, super hard. And you can see that the blacks are really, really nice, kind of come out really solid. So I'm pulling away that heart and you can see that color reveal underneath and I am digging it. We've got this little heart window that's going to go so nicely with the paper hug inside sentiment. So I'm going to go ahead and take some Gina K Designs foam tape and just pop it on the back of this die cut. And I'm just going to go ahead and adhere the whole die cut to the card. I'm just using a little bit of this foam tape. It's really nice, this Gina K Designs foam tape. It doesn't add a lot of height to the card, but it's really, really good with this watercolor paper. It sticks really well and it doesn't add a ton of height to the card. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and put some of this twisted citron down onto my craft mat. And we're just going to do a little bit of watercolor painting of the succulent that's here in this floral and a little bit on the leaves and the feather element. So I'm just dropping this color in. Now the paper is dry, my brush is wet, and the ink is wet. So I'm just adding a little bit more water and moving that color around. This is another super simple watercolor technique that you can try, especially if you're just getting started. You're just using the water from your brush and from the ink and applying it to the die cut. And I'm just drying it in between so that I can go in and add another layer. With using watercolors or using inks, distress inks, as a watercolor medium, the more you layer colors on top of each other, the more vibrant and glowy that they're going to get. That technique is called glazing. When you let things dry in between, or you dry them yourself. And when you add color on top, because the colors are not opaque and they're translucent, more of the color from underneath kind of shows through, and the two layer together to create that intensity of color and give you those glowy effects with the color. Okay, so now I'm just adding a little bit of the the picked raspberry to the feather. And you can see that I've got a lot of that really nice color from the ink onto my brush, and I'm just direct to paper painting it in. And just this little tiny bit of color adds a really nice touch to the top of this die cut. So we've got that color underneath in the base, and we've got all this color happening on top, and it's just balances things out a little bit in the design. So I'm just going ahead and drying it up so that it's really nice and dry so that I can move on to the next step. And I'm going to add the whole base to the card base, the Gina K Designs heavyweight cardstock. And I use some of the double-sided tape from Gina K because it works really, really well with the watercolor paper. Okay, so I've got my Misty here, and I've got some of that jet black ink, and I put the whole card into the Misty just to line up the sentiment, a paper hug inside. And I probably could have done this just rogue without the Misty, but I really wanted a nice saturated sentiment here. So I wanted to do it twice and get it in position well. I am really digging the color of this card and how the the botanical design is really leading your eye down to the words "a paper hug inside." So I'm going to grab a few of these sequins, and I generally don't add a lot of gems and bling, but I think just a few little sequins will add a little bit of glitz to the card, and I just want to kind of create a triad look and feel around that botanical. So I've dropped a little bit of the Gina K Designs Connect glue down in threes, and I'm using this jewel picker from Marvy, which is kind of super fun, and I lost it for a really long time in my space, and I finally found it again. It's really nice because it holds everything down for you and makes it really super simple to apply sequins. And I am loving the way this design is just kind of pointing down to a paper hug inside. It's got a lot of fun colors, and this super easy pop out heart just kind of creates a little extra texture and dimension on the card. I'm just really digging it. It was super simple to create. We used one stamp, and we also went through some really super simple watercolor techniques. So here's another look at the card, and I'm just loving it. I hope you enjoyed today's card tutorial. Thanks so much for watching. Please consider sharing the joy by liking this video and subscribing to this channel. You can also take a look at some of my other card tutorials and my watercolor tutorials on this channel. Again, thanks so much for watching. I'm so grateful you could join me today, and I'll see you next time.